I was born in Calgary, Alberta, and I'm a loyal Western Canadian who has been happily transplanted to Toronto. I am a cradle evangelical. I was brought up in an independent evangelical church, and there were really two mentors in my life when I was in my late teens who were influential. One was a pastor who was a very good Bible preacher who I admired and wanted to follow in the footsteps of. And the other was somebody that I met at university in a religious studies program, and he was an evangelical Anglican Old Testament scholar. So my two great passions are, I guess, preaching in the church and the academic study of the Old Testament. I'm the basic degree director at Wycliffe College, which means I oversee the most of the master's level programs and kind of an academic advisor and mentor. But what I do mostly here is teach Old Testament and Semitic languages, and the spin that I put on the Old Testament usually involves preaching. So I teach a course on preaching the book of Genesis. I teach another course on preaching the book of Psalms, for example. And more recently, since our children have left the nest, I've taken an interest in doing some teaching overseas. So one semester in 4, I'll go and teach in an overseas setting so I can learn more about the church and so that I can contribute to the broader church. So my boss tells me that my title now is Professor of Scripture and Global Christianity. I, for some reason, just have a great interest in Semitic languages. I'm fascinated with the Hebrew language. And in my training, both at seminary and at Yale, where I did my PhD, my training was mostly in Semitic languages. So I studied Aramaic and Hebrew and Ugaritic and some classical Arabic. So I teach Semitic languages. But I think my biggest passion really is helping students to get excited about the Old Testament, helping them to be able to realize that they can make discoveries on their own about the Old Testament, and to dive in and learn and discover so that they can be excited about what to preach or what to teach. I also really enjoy mentoring graduate students. I direct several doctoral dissertations at Wycliffe and at the Toronto School of Theology, as well as at the University of Toronto through the Near and Middle Eastern Civilizations Department. And I take an interest in my graduate students, and I'm glad that in most every case they've been able to find a job after they've graduated, so that's a good thing. I like to think that through teaching the Old Testament that I can help students understand that the Old Testament is a vital part of Scripture, and that although there are some difficulties with the Old Testament that are sort of notorious, that those are actually overcomable, and that the Old Testament is part of the Christian message. It's part of the message of the gospel. So helping people to have a positive experience, learning Hebrew, learning Semitic languages, and of, just learning the Old Testament.